Hi, my name is Heather Moore. I'm an investigator with the law offices of Chad Cronin. I'm sworn and immunized. I can't be prosecuted. I can't be subpoenaed. I am the whistleblower. This is going to be one of two or three roughly 15-minute, little less than 15-minute statements, video records, video recordings that I'm making for the press that covered the FBI, HUD, OIG, and IRS raid of Byron Brown's offices. The attorney that I work for got powerful Democrats elected. A federal judge, a city commissioner, I believe she was. Her name was Regina Hill, I believe. This attorney was also a biased crimes advisor for Orlando PD, specialized in identifying hate crimes for their police department. He was a published civil rights scholar. He was a jury consultant, a former domestic violence prosecutor, an attorney for human rights campaign that helped get Democrats like Mel Carnahan elected in Missouri. He was the former governor who ran for Senate against John Ashcroft, got killed in a plane crash 11 days before the election, and since that, the Missouri had a law that you couldn't remove somebody's name from the ballot uh, within 14 days of the election. So he died 11 days within the election. It was too late to take his name off the ballot, and we ultimately got a dead man elected because we didn't want John Ashcroft in there. Now, I didn't know Chad at the time, but he and I became best friends after we met at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I went to the place called the Center, which had LGBT Alcoholics Anonymous meetings because I kept having severe pain, and it was causing problems, and I was going to the ER, and basically what they were telling me was the pain was all in my head, that I was just drug seeking, and that it was a psychosomatic reaction to having been molested as a child when they actually knew I had cancer. And this attorney that works for the police department and a former federal prosecutor, federal investigator for the Department of Justice while he worked for Human Rights Campaign. He didn't just get people elected. He said that they were independently contracted to investigate waste, fraud, and abuse by the Department of Justice, or independently contracted by DOJ to investigate waste, fraud, and abuses, is how I meant to say that. And anyway, I met him there. I didn't realize that he went there to troll for sex abuse victims and to exploit people with addiction and alcohol disorders so that he could use their addiction as an alibi for his crimes and his drug abuse and his alcoholism, his domestic violence, and all of his other, whatever it was he was up to. I didn't know that. The other people in AA did. They knew that I wasn't really an addict or an alcoholic. They knew that my medical needs weren't being met, and they knew that his father was on the board of directors at the hospital. Those hospitals were running fraud scams, and no one was actually happy with their medical care. And in fact, when I went back down there, the other attorneys who Chad launched the original criminal investigation, and then when he realized his father was implicated, he backed out. But he started that investigation as an AA project to help me. Well, the way AA works is you don't get to go in, illegally solicit someone's case as an attorney, and then use your police connections as a cop to make sure that you get paid for it, but that person gets screwed. AA has real strict rules about cops going in there and trolling for victims. That's bad juju. That's a good way to get sued by AA. And they take that separation of church and state stuff real serious. cops don't get to sit outside of AA meetings or NA meetings and take down license plate and then follow them around to see if they relapse. It's the same difference. And basically, they thought that once Chad had eventually relapsed into active alcoholism and addiction, and they thought once he got sober, he might resume his duties as employer and as my legal counsel and boyfriend. We were boyfriend and girlfriend. I didn't just work for him, I lived with him. He kept telling me that if I left him, I wasn't getting proper medical care. I knew his father was involved. He said that his father stole my antibiotics while I was going septic from untreated cancer, which I didn't know it was untreated cancer. I knew that I was going septic and that there was a pelvic issue and there was all kinds of other infections, and that the antibiotics took care of all of it, and they kept having to keep giving me new antibiotics, and I knew something wasn't right, and I said, I gotta leave, you can't handle this pressure. He and I had been threatened by my parents. We got threatened by an old childhood neighbor named Darla Munoz Natoloi. I was threatened on Facebook. She worked for Homeland Security. When he launched this federal investigation, criminal investigation into healthcare fraud and RICO violations and Brady violations by his former federal prosecutor, they weren't necessarily domestic violence prosecutors, they were state prosecutors, Kim Mann and Karen Bankowitz at the Orange County State's Attorney's Office. It was federal violations. He called it a federal Florida Chapter 119 lawsuit. And I've got the letter that he typed up to them to let them know that he was going to seek an expungement and sealment, and then he was letting me know he was going to get me whistleblower rewards. And there was healthcare fraud involved because they were saying that I was an addict and that there was nothing, I was seeking drugs for chronic back pain, and they actually knew I had cancer, and they weren't treating the cancer or telling me I had cancer because I didn't have insurance. And you would think, well, they would make money by getting you your cancer treatment because there's grants. No, they make more money by not treating it. They were committing what's called unbundling fraud, where they take each symptom and assign it a separate diagnosis. And none of those diagnoses individually can get you SSI, or in the state of Florida and the state of Missouri, you don't get Medicaid unless you qualify for SSI. And cancer at stage 1 isn't going to get you SSI because it's easily treated and cured at stage 1. So they do false psychiatric diagnoses. And in Orlando, it was Advent Health and Orlando Regional Medical Center that was working with what was called Lakeside at the time. Now it's been taken over by somebody else. But they were getting people fraudulently qualified for Social Security, and then that retroactively paid for all that unbundling fraud. And at the time, I would say, before I ever found out I had cancer, with all the ER visits from the falling and the infections, because it causes infections all over your body when that infection gets in your system, because a cancer mass ruptures and you bleed internally, and it puts all that infection into your system. And once it gets in your lymph nodes and everywhere else, you're having pneumonia, you're having all kinds of issues. And all told, it probably racked up $300,000, almost $500,000 in ER visits alone over a 2 or 3 year time period. And then they wanted me to get qualified for Medicaid that would retroactively pay for all that. So they were turning a $20,000 problem into basically $1 million problem. Now, that was before I got covered by insurance. Once I got covered by a marketplace plan, and then eventually United, Arizona Medicaid and United, New York Medicaid, which actually I wasn't covered by United when I first got New York Medicaid, they fraudulently billed United for almost $1 million. Or no, fraudulently billed United almost $700,000, but New York State Medicaid, which is basically Erie County Medicaid, $300,000. So they fraudulently billed me at this point over $1 million, most of which, over half of which, has been covered by United, a Medicaid program or Marketplace program at some point. And one of the police officers in Buffalo says, he says, I don't understand why a doctor wouldn't treat you for cancer. I said, they make a ton of money not treating you for it. And the medical fraud isn't the only fraud that results. They get patient farming, because once they let your diagnosis go and cause all the sepsis, then it causes renal problems, lung problems, heart problems, vision problems. I now have hemorrhaging behind the right eye. The cancer was deliberately accelerated by an SSM St. Mary's Catholic Health GYN oncologist in Missouri. The cancer's in both sinuses, it's in both lungs, both kidneys, and I'm staying alive by a special diet and lots of antibiotics. But the point is, it's called patient farming. At that point, they get to farm you out to all these specialists that keep maintaining these false diagnoses. Now, what that does is that multiplies their income, their revenue, exponentially, and they're doing this systematically, coast to coast. And it is being enabled by both major parties, public officials in both major parties, Republican and Democrat. When it started out in Florida, it was under Rick Scott. Rick Scott was popped as the CEO of Columbia CHA for over $1 billion in Medicaid fraud, which he never paid back, and then eventually got elected governor, and then appointed people to the various oversight positions to make sure there was no oversight on the fraud, or the what was it called, Administration for Healthcare, the ACHA, something or another. It was some sort of jurisdiction that does oversight on the healthcare administrators. They refused to do an investigation as well. Or actually, I did get contacted by one investigator who said he said, none of this makes sense, you shouldn't, this is definitely patient dumping and fraud, and then I never heard back from him. So what happened with Byron Brown is Byron Brown and Cuomo and Letitia James are profiting from these fraud schemes with United, Canteen, HealthNet, and then they formed a nationwide monopoly called Common Spirit Health in February of 2019. And they made sure I was locked up at ECMC for 6 weeks for no reason. They basically just made stuff up. The doctor who got me locked up was only in my room for 90 seconds. And the video footage at ECMC and my recordings, I recorded all of the medical encounters. That lady didn't ask a single diagnostic question. She came in the room. I said, who are you? She said, I'm Dr. Jasna Singh. I'm a psychiatrist. I said, why are you here? I didn't make any complaints about depression, anxiety, or anything related to psych. Well, the doctors are worried about your mood. I said, I have untreated accelerated cancer that's at stage 4. I said, I have untreated medical issues. If I do have mood issues, that would explain it. I said, I don't have any Axis 1 or Axis 2 diagnosis. I didn't ask for a psychiatrist, so this looks a lot like patient staring. I said, they had to have manufactured evidence to justify sending you in here as a specialist. I said, I pointed to my phone. I said, I recorded all of the previous medical encounters. I said nothing, and they said nothing to me about my mood. She said, you recorded everything? I said, yes. She ran out of the room. She wasn't in there 90 seconds. Next thing I know, I've been involuntarily committed to ECMC. I'll tell you the rest on the next session.